Hi, I'm Gary Takach, founder of CEO University. Today I want to talk about a topic that many privately held company CEOs know is important, but too often postpone. That topic is succession. And I don't mean succession only in the traditional sense of retirement. I don't mean who takes over someday when I'm done. I mean a much more immediate question. If you had to step away from your company tomorrow, would the business still run? Would decisions still get made? Would customers still feel confident? Would your leadership team know what to do? Would your culture hold together? Would your employees feel clarity or would they feel uncertainty? Those questions may sound dramatic, but they are extremely practical. A recent Deloitte private survey of 300 family business executives found that nearly 8 in 10 expect a CEO transition within the next decade. Even more striking, 42% expect that transition within just 3 to 5 years. That is not some far-off issue. That is close. That is within the planning horizon of almost every serious privately held company. In that same survey, 85% of respondents said strategic CEO succession planning is critical to long-term success. But only 57% actually have a succession plan, and only 23% are actively implementing one. So the gap is not awareness. Most CEOs know this matters. The gap is action, and that gap is where risk lives. There was also a related Deloitte/WSJ report that pointed to another important issue in family businesses. Many companies have family members who are interested in eventually becoming CEO, but far fewer are considered ready today. That creates a very common challenge in privately held businesses. There may be interest, there may be loyalty, there may be history, there may even be an assumption that the next leader is already obvious. But interest is not the same as readiness, and hope is not the same as a plan. That is the leadership lesson I want to focus on today. Succession is not just about naming the next CEO. Succession is about building a company that is strong enough to outlast the current CEO. For many privately held companies, the CEO is still the center of gravity. The CEO holds the key customer relationships. The CEO solves the hardest people problems. The CEO makes the final call on pricing, hiring, strategy, vendor relationships, and banking relationships. Now, in the early stages of a company, that may be necessary. The founder or owner often has to carry a lot of the weight. But over time, what once made the company strong can become the very thing that limits it. If every meaningful decision has to come back to the CEO, the company cannot scale. If every customer issue has to be solved by the CEO, the team cannot mature. If the leadership bench is not being developed, the culture depends on the CEO being in every room. And if the culture depends on the CEO being in every room, then the culture is not yet embedded. It is personalized. That is risky. For a privately held company, this risk shows up in several ways. First, it affects growth. A company can only grow as fast as its decision-making capacity. If the CEO is the bottleneck, growth eventually slows, not because the market opportunity is gone, but because the organization cannot process decisions fast enough. Second, it affects valuation. A buyer or investor will look closely at how dependent the business is on one person. That creates risk, and risk usually reduces value. Third, it affects the leadership team. Strong leaders want responsibility, they want to be trusted, but if the CEO keeps pulling decisions back, those leaders eventually leave. Fourth, it affects culture. When people do not know who has authority, they wait, they defer. They say, let's ask the CEO. That is a sign of lack of leadership clarity. So what should CEOs do? I recommend starting with 3 practical questions. Question number 1, where is the company still too dependent on me? This requires honesty. Look at customer relationships, sales, operations, finance, and hiring. Where do people still come to you for every call? That is your dependency map, and every CEO should have one. Question number 2, who on my team is ready for more responsibility? Not who has the title or who is the most loyal, who is actually showing judgment, curiosity, and emotional maturity in alignment with the company's values. Sometimes the next generation of leadership is already in the company, but they have not been given the reps. They have not been allowed to practice or be coached through real decisions. Leadership readiness does not come from watching the CEO make decisions. It comes from making decisions, receiving feedback, and learning from the outcome. Question number 3, what decision can I intentionally stop making? This may be the most powerful question of all. Choose one category of decision to begin transferring. It could be a hiring decision, a customer service decision, or a vendor decision. But be clear, do not just say, I want you to take more ownership. That is too vague. Say, starting this month, I want you to own this decision. Here is the outcome, the guardrails, when I want to be informed and when I do not need to be involved. That is how leaders grow. They need authority, expectations, guardrails, and feedback. One of the biggest mistakes CEOs make is confusing delegation with abdication. Delegation does not mean handing something off and disappearing. Delegation means transferring responsibility with clarity on outcomes, values, limits, and communication. That is how you build leadership depth. And leadership depth is the real foundation of succession, whether you plan to sell, transition to family, or promote internally. The work begins the same way. You build a company that can think, decide, and act without everything flowing through you. This does not diminish your role, it elevates it. The CEO's highest value work is building the system, the team, and the culture that produces better answers over time. That is a very different job and a hard transition to make. The habits that helped you build the company may not be the habits that help it grow beyond you. Eventually, the company needs less control and more clarity, less rescuing and more coaching, less being the hub of every decision, and more building leaders who can make good decisions without you in the room. That is the shift. It is not easy, but it is necessary. So here's the practical exercise. Take a sheet of paper and write down the 5 decisions that most commonly come back to you. Write the name of the person who should own it in the future. Then write one action you can take in the next 30 days to begin transferring that responsibility. Not someday, in the next 30 days. Because succession planning is practiced in the rhythm of the business. It shows up in who speaks, who decides, and whether your leaders are learning to lead or just learning to wait for you. That is the real test. If your team waits, you have dependency. If your team acts with clarity and alignment, you have leadership depth. It protects the business, grows the next generation, increases enterprise value, and gives you more freedom. At CEO University, this is exactly the kind of conversation we believe privately held company CEOs need to have. Real conversations about building companies that can grow beyond the founder. So here's my question for you today. If you had to step away tomorrow, where would your company feel it first? That answer points to your most important leadership opportunity. If you are ready for deeper conversations like this with other CEOs, I invite you to learn more about CEO University. Because the goal is not just to become a better CEO, the goal is to build a better company.